In a moment of awakening, we discover this truth. There is nothing wrong with us. We are inherently whole. I choose this quote to begin, for it runs counter to a subtle belief most of us carry, that there is always some fundamental flaw within us. For years, I found myself relentlessly running, trying to hide that void. Studying more, working more, striving harder, loving more, only to fail more. Yet, instead of filling up, that chasm only grew wider. Perhaps you too have lived this way, in a race that never reaches its finish line. The book I want to share with you is an invitation to stop. Radical Acceptance doesn't teach us how to become perfect, nor does it offer a 10-step guide to happiness. It leads us back to the place we dare to confront the least, our own feelings of inadequacy, fear, and desire. The author wrote it not just with psychological knowledge, but with long nights spent in dreams of powerlessness, with years of carrying the I am not enough complex, and with tears shed while sitting with students and patients. This is not an easy book to swallow. It won't make you feel exhilarated like after a motivational speech. It's like a mirror placed directly in front of you, forcing you to see the parts you usually want to hide. But precisely because of this, it has the power to change you. For when you dare to look at what you fear most, the feeling of unworthiness, you discover a paradox. Your wholeness has never left you. You simply forgot it. I still remember the first time I read the story of the white tiger, imprisoned its whole life in a narrow cage. When finally released into a vast space, it still only circled the same small corner. I realized I was that tiger. So many opportunities out there, so much love right beside me, but I was trapped in a cage of judgment, self-doubt, and fear. And that cage wasn't built by anyone else but by myself. In this book, you will encounter many such moments. Everyday images suddenly become mirrors. A child lighting up just because they were listened to for the first time. A man admitting his anger, hiding a fear of losing his child. A woman realizing that beneath her addiction was only a desperate longing to be embraced. These stories are not embellished or overly sentimental, but so real that you can't help but ask yourself, how many times have I hidden my pain beneath layers of masks? But what truly connected me to this book isn't just that it points out the wounds, but how it opens a path to healing through stopping, through mindfulness, through compassion. Not compassion as a lofty virtue, but as a concrete action. Placing a hand on your chest, speaking a gentle word to yourself, daring to admit you are afraid, you are longing. From there, layers of armor fall away, revealing a heart still beating, still wanting to love and be loved. So I want to ask you a question I myself have never stopped pondering. If tomorrow you woke up and stopped believing there was something wrong with you, how would you live differently? What would you dare to try that you've avoided for so long? How would you look at your family, friends, or lover if you knew that both you and they were already whole? One night in a dream, I found myself rushing. Sometimes climbing a steep slope, sometimes struggling against a strong current, sometimes trying to pull a loved one out of an impending disaster. My mind raced, but my body felt heavy, as if trapped in thick molasses. The harder I tried, the more powerless I became, and in the end, all that remained was a feeling of solitude, like someone abandoned in a play with no escape. That dream wasn't just a trick of the subconscious. It was a mirror reflecting the state I had lived in for so many years. A subtle delusion that makes us believe we are always flawed, always not good enough, as if an invisible voice repeats in our heads, "You've never been worthy." It steals our ability to enjoy ordinary moments and turns every experience into a harsh test. This feeling has 1,000 faces. Some dive into work, wearing themselves down to prove their worth. Some turn to drugs, alcohol, or fleeting relationships just to temporarily forget the emptiness inside. Some cling tightly to a relationship, fearing that if they lose it, they'll have no reason to live. And some turn suffering into a weapon, creating enemies to vent their anger, from a disagreeable boss to an entire community, a whole nation. I once lived in a strict monastic community, waking at 3:30 a.m., taking cold showers, meditating, and chanting. Every morning, I felt a stillness, as if enveloped in a gentle ocean. But just a few hours later, the old shadow would return, self-reproach, fears that I wasn't diligent enough, pure enough, good enough. This familiar cycle followed me for years, even when I thought I was on the path to liberation. I realized that the "I am not good enough" feeling isn't just an isolated issue for a few unfortunate individuals. It's a collective malady, especially in cultures that glorify competition and achievement. The creation story many of us grew up with, about the Garden of Eden and the first sin, implants a default in our minds. We were marked from the beginning, we must atone to return. From there, we plunge into a spiral of proving our worth, controlling our bodies, emotions, work, and others, just to try and reclaim that lost ticket. In contrast, other cultures view life with entirely different eyes. In one encounter, when Western teachers explained the phenomenon of self-hatred, the Tibetan spiritual leader couldn't grasp it. To him, the idea was so strange it was almost pathological, because he believed everyone inherently possesses an enlightened, pure nature. This gap shows that sometimes culture itself becomes the cage, nurturing the delusion of inadequacy and separation. I'll never forget the story of a little girl dining with her family. When her parents ordered for her, she boldly declared, "I want a hot dog, fries, and Coke." Her father immediately dismissed it, but the waitress turned, smiled, and asked, "So, what would you like on your hot dog?" In that moment, the child's eyes lit up. "She thinks I'm real." That small moment says it all. To be seen, to be acknowledged, is the ground upon which a person feels their worth. How many adults grow up without that experience? They are merely extensions of parental expectations, products to be shown off or molded, not individuals with souls. They learn to live to please others, afraid to reveal their true selves. In such an environment, the seed of unworthiness takes root early and grows over the years. When that pain manifests, we devise countless ways to escape. We cover it with achievements, with a sculpted appearance, with a packed schedule, with forced laughter. We fall into a loop, trying to hide, then reaffirming that we are indeed flawed. Like the person in that dream, the more we struggle, the deeper we sink into the thick molasses of powerlessness. I once heard a friend say, "The feeling that something is wrong with me is like an invisible poison gas I breathe every day unseen but gradually permeating, making me weary and alienated from myself." The sad truth is, many only realize this at the end of their lives. Some lie on their deathbeds, exclaiming, "My whole life I thought there was something wrong with me," then close their eyes in regret. We don't need to wait for the final moment to awaken, but we must also admit that waking up from this delusion isn't a day's work. It requires the courage to directly face fear, along with a training of the heart and mind. During a meditation session, I told the story of the little girl in the restaurant. As we left, my mother sat beside me in the car, her voice choked with emotion. "That little girl was me long ago," she said. My mother recounted how she grew up like a shadow in her parents' eyes, never seen as a real person. Her entire value lay in whether she made them proud. Her joys and sorrows had no space to exist. From a young age, she learned that she would only be loved if she pleased others. This story is not uncommon. Many carry memories of parents who were not truly present or too busy to see them, or who molded them into something they dreamed of. Sometimes, they too were just children who grew up in lack and passed that burden from generation to generation. The reminder, "You're not enough," thus echoes on. I remember a student in a meditation course talking about his childhood. One day, at 7 years old, he ran into the kitchen, crying because his older brother teased him, hoping for a comforting embrace. He tugged at his mother's sleeve, but instead of hugging him, she turned, hands on hips, eyes full of annoyance. "Don't be so weak." That unspoken answer, her eyes, her attitude etched a message into his mind. Needing someone else is shameful. From then on, whenever he felt a need for closeness, he felt ashamed. This natural desire became a stain on his heart. We grow up in a culture that praises independence, competition, and strength. Natural emotions like fear, anger, and longing are seen as signs of weakness. In abusive families, the message is even crueler. "You're worthless, you're just a burden." Even without overt violence, many children implicitly learn that they are only valuable if they are good, smart, or exceptional. To survive in such an atmosphere, we invent all sorts of strategies to hide our fragile core. Some embark on a series of self-improvement projects, exercising, dieting, upgrading their appearance, signing up for more courses, meditating diligently. Not all these activities are bad, but the underlying motive is the fear that I am not enough. Thus, they never bring true peace. Some choose the safe path. They avoid challenges, shying away from situations where they might fail, like the boy I once encouraged to try playing an instrument or tennis, but he refused because he wanted to be good from the start. In his head echoed a humorous yet poignant saying, "Trying is the first step towards failure." Others fill every moment with work. In a society that worships productivity, we are easily praised for working hard. But in reality, it's also a form of avoidance, because when we stop, emptiness rushes in and the fear, I am worthless, becomes clearer than ever. Still others choose to withdraw from the present. They rehash scenarios in their heads, things to do, old mistakes, impending dangers like a mocking telegram. Start worrying, details to follow. This vague anxiety keeps us constantly on guard, as if we stop worrying, life will overwhelm us. And there's another familiar strategy: turning ourselves into the judge. A voice constantly scores us in our heads, pointing out every flaw, no different from the judgmental voice of our parents from long ago. Some even admit, I inherited my father's walk, voice, habits, and my mother's contempt for him. Self-judgment becomes a way we think we can control, can restrain the bad within us. If we don't blame ourselves, we easily project it outwards, turning others into enemies to make ourselves feel less inadequate. At least we are right. But this separation is just another loop of fear. All these strategies, though different, share one consequence: they reinforce the grip of self-doubt. The more we try to escape, the more we confirm to ourselves that something is indeed wrong with us. When the anxiety about inadequacy becomes unbearable, we often seek a place to unload it. Sometimes that's ourselves, but sometimes it's others. A father, a boss, a political group, even an entire nation. We construct images of enemies, attributing to them all imperfections and malice. This provides a temporary feeling that we are stronger, more righteous, that we are in control of the situation. But in truth, it's just another mask for the fragile fear within us. There are times when external threats are real. People can harm each other. We can harm ourselves. But if we react with hatred, we only widen the chasm and sow more fear. Only when we face that fragility with a wise heart do we have a chance to escape the grip. The deep root of it all lies not in individual events, but in the fundamental perception that we are separate entities. More than 2,000 years ago, under the Bodhi tree, a man sat through the night to look directly into his suffering. And he realized that the root of all suffering lies in the illusion of a separate self. When our mind clings to the idea of an individual self, it opens up an endless chain of craving and aversion. We forget the primordial ground, a stream of awareness and love that is already present. What we call I is actually just a collection of memories, emotions, habits, but we weave them into a story and believe it is a fixed self. Thus, even a moment of sadness, a word of criticism, is enough to make us feel this whole I is broken. And if we've already sunk into the feeling of I'm not okay, it easily transforms into I am broken. Sometimes, without any clear reason, I still feel a vague anxiety within me that I am not enough. It could be a lurking whisper, pushing me to chase work, achievements, or simply a chilling sense of loneliness. Separation has become an instinct tied to survival, just as primordial single-celled organisms built a membrane between themselves and the outside world. But when fear takes over, we forget that beneath that membrane, there is still an ocean that connects everything. Desires and fears are not enemies. They are the energy that helps us survive. But when we confuse them with our very nature, we only see ourselves as small and lacking. We forget that we also possess curiosity, humor, kindness. We forget the breath that nourishes us every minute, the love that connects us to others, even the fragility yet beauty of this life. More importantly, we forget the light of awareness that is our deepest nature. Some people, after many years, realize they have wasted their lives enduring self-hatred. But as soon as they see the prison they are in, they also simultaneously see the open door. A meditation master once said, "Freedom is living without worrying about imperfection." That doesn't mean we become perfect, but that we accept imperfection as an essential part of existence. Sickness, old age, moments of ignorance all are natural flow. When we no longer wage war against imperfection, we no longer waste our lives trying to be different. A writer once described Western culture as a tree uprooted, its branches suspended in the air. He said, "We are slowly dying from a lack of nourishment from our inner roots," and I find that to be profoundly true. We only revive when we reconnect with our inherent goodness, with our natural interconnectedness, and with each moment. The delusion of inadequacy seems to be humanity's fate, but at the same time, the ability to awaken lies within that very nature. We escape the prison when we stop waging war against ourselves and begin to live with a heart that is both clear-sighted and compassionate. That is the open door back to the ancient garden, a place that still exists within us with wholeness, awareness, and love that has never been lost. Once at the capital city zoo, there was a white tiger named Mohini. For many years, it was confined to a cramped cage, only a few square meters wide. The floor was cold concrete, surrounded by iron bars. Day after day, it walked its familiar orbit, each step seemingly measuring its own prison. Its caretakers, feeling compassion, eventually decided to build it a natural environment. Several acres of land with grass, trees, a pond, and even hills to climb. It was a paradise compared to the old iron cage. But when released, Mohini didn't explore that vast field. It huddled in a corner and continued to pace only within an area of about 12 square meters, so much so that the spot became barren. For the rest of its life, it never stepped out of the mental confines that had been etched into its mind. The story of Mohini is not just the tragedy of a wild animal, it is an allegory of ourselves. The prison door has opened, but habits of self-imprisonment and self-judgment keep us circling in the old cage. We hear the call of freedom, unconditional love, living fully, breathing with the beauty around us. But then we retreat into the familiar corner of voices saying, "You're not enough, you have to do more, you have to be different." And so, even though the world is wide open, we remain rooted in a narrow plot of land we ourselves limited. The most frightening thing is not the lack of freedom, but having freedom within reach, yet wasting an entire life in old patterns. Unlike Mohini, we can learn to recognize the cage in our minds and know that it is not our destiny. The way out begins with a simple yet often forgotten act: acceptance. Not the kind of resignation, but looking directly at the present moment, our body, emotions, thoughts, without rushing to judge, without dismissing. Accepting both joy and sorrow, both fragility and longing. I call this radical acceptance. This sounds paradoxical, doesn't it? Isn't the feeling of imperfection precisely what causes us suffering? Why accept it? But it is precisely the attitude of, "I cannot have this, I must change it," that feeds the cage. When we allow ourselves to feel fully, a door opens. Acceptance has two wings, like a bird's wings, helping us fly out of our internal prison. One wing is clear seeing, the ability to accurately perceive what is happening in our body and mind. We see fear gripping our chest, thoughts racing, the desire to escape. And we simply acknowledge, yes, it is present, without embellishing, without chasing after it. The other wing is tenderness, the ability to cherish what we have just seen with a soft heart. We allow fear to be present without pushing it away. We embrace longing like a mother embraces her child. When compassion is present, acceptance becomes complete. It is not surrender. These two wings are linked. Clear seeing without tenderness easily turns meditation into harsh self-scrutiny, making us despise ourselves more. Tenderness without clear seeing easily leads to self-pity, circling in old stories. When both wings open, we fly, leaving the well-worn path of self-hatred. Imagine being rejected by a loved one. By habit, we would cycle between anger, sadness, and self-blame. But if we bring in these two wings, we stop to clearly see the pang in our chest, the thoughts of "I am unlovable," and at the same time embrace that feeling with tenderness. In that very moment, the spiral stops. We still feel pain, but we are no longer submerged by it. We begin to have space to choose, instead of being carried away. Radical acceptance applies not only to individual moments, but also to the larger patterns of life. We can look at how we often get angry, how we hurt our children, then clearly see the underlying motives, feel the consequences, and from within that tenderness hear a whispered reminder: I truly want to love, I don't want to cause suffering. That is how acceptance gradually adjusts behavior, not through coercion, but through attunement with the heart. And most importantly, radical acceptance is not something alien. It is inherent within us, like our pristine nature that has never been lost. When we remember that, we are like the ocean embracing the waves. No matter how turbulent the waves, the ocean remains vast and calm. Sometimes, what we need most is not more effort, but to know how to stop. Like the evening the Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree, he didn't try to eliminate tempting illusions or fears, but simply sat still, opening his heart to everything. This pause I call the sacred pause. It is a small bridge that takes us out of reactive patterns and back to the life that is unfolding. We are often too quick when discomfort arises. We react immediately, getting angry, fleeing, finding something to soothe ourselves. The sacred pause invites us to do the opposite. Stand still for a moment, notice our breath, the sensation on our skin, our heartbeat, not to make it disappear, but to be present with it. Just a few such moments are enough to open a space where we are no longer carried away. Once, a student told me that whenever he felt anxious, he would check his phone, scroll through news, looking for something to fill the void. I told him, next time before you open your phone, stop for 3 breaths and ask yourself, in this moment, what is happening within me? He tried it, and after just a few weeks, he realized that often he didn't need to rush into action. Simply allowing the feeling to be there, it calmed down. The sacred pause opens the door to another step, becoming friends with yourself. This sounds simple, but for many, it is the hardest. We are used to treating ourselves like a lazy person who needs to be pushed, a naughty child who needs to be punished, a weak person who needs to be scorned. Yet, we don't realize we never treat those we love that way. Becoming friends with yourself means completely changing your approach. It's not, I have to be better to deserve love, but I love myself even when I'm clumsy, even when I stumble. When an emotion arises, anger, envy, craving, we no longer call it an enemy but listen to it as we would a friend trying to say something. I once knew a woman trapped in a cycle of self-criticism. Every time she made a small mistake, she would repeat the familiar phrase, "I'm so stupid." I advised her to try replacing that phrase with, "Hello, little friend, I see your worry." Gradually, she felt softer, no longer weighed down by that "stupid" phrase. This small change is like opening a window to let light and fresh air in. When we learn to look at ourselves with friendly eyes, there is nothing left to hide. The parts we thought were ugly turn out to be just hidden corners waiting to be touched with kindness. This doesn't mean we give up, but quite the opposite. From the foundation of acceptance, we gain the strength to change. Just as a tree only grows when its roots are firmly in the earth, a human being only thrives when placed in an atmosphere of love. The sacred pause and unconditional friendship with oneself are not techniques to achieve spiritual success, but a way of living. They remind us that we don't need to compete for the right to exist. Simply being present with all that is happening is enough. We often live like those who have lost their way home, our minds wandering in plans, worries, and memories, while our bodies are neglected like empty shells. Yet the body itself is the most direct gateway back to life. When I began teaching meditation, the first thing I invited students to do was not to focus on some lofty concept, but to feel their feet touching the ground, the rising and falling of their belly with each breath, the breeze on their skin. Just that, and we are present. But returning to the body is not just a technique, it is a reconciliation after years of separation. Many carry their bodies like a strange land. Some despise their bodies, thinking they are not beautiful enough. Some see them only as tools to achieve goals. Some view them as a burden of illness. When we turn our backs on our body, we also turn our backs on life itself. Once, a student of mine cried during a meditation session. She confessed that for years she had lived as if only the part of her from the neck up was human. The body from the neck down was just a machine, forced to diet and exercise to please others. When invited to sit still, place her hand on her heart, she felt like she was returning to herself for the first time. Tears fell as she realized how many years she had neglected her own home. Returning to the body means allowing all sensations to find a place to reside. The tension in the shoulders, the pang in the stomach, the racing heartbeat of fear, all are messages. Instead of hating or trying to push them away, we can listen to what they are saying. Sometimes, simply acknowledging, this is tension, this is fear, already releases half the weight. From this bodily ground, we step into another depth. In many spiritual traditions, desire is seen as the root of suffering, and it is true that when we cling to it, it binds us. But if we only suppress or chase it away, we miss an open door. Remember a time when you truly longed for something, a love, security, a sense of belonging. Beneath the surface of every specific desire is a common current, the wish to connect, to be whole. So, desire is not an enemy but a map leading us back to our source. A man once told me he plunged into fleeting relationships, one after another. He thought he was addicted to sex, but when he sat down and felt more deeply, he broke down crying. Actually, I just wanted to be held and to feel important to someone. Beneath the superficial layer of carnal desire was a very human need, to be loved and acknowledged. When he touched that core, the endless cycle of searching began to loosen. Radical acceptance of desire means daring to look directly at it, not identifying ourselves with it, but also not chasing it away. We admit, yes, I am desiring, and then go deeper. What lies beneath? Often, we will find a universal need connected to the most vibrant quality within us, the longing to connect with life. I remember once, during meditation, I felt an unnameable thirst surging within me. If I had followed my usual habit, I would have sought something to fill it: work, affection, food. But in the stillness, I allowed it to be present, and gradually it transformed into a soft feeling, like a river. It was a yearning for my source, a desire to merge with something larger than myself. And so, the body is not just a shell, desire is not just a chain. When we return to them with awareness and tenderness, they become our guides, guides who are always honest, always reminding us that we belong, we are connected. We have never been separated from the great ocean of life. There's a kind of urge often misunderstood. It appears in many guises: longing for love, hunger for power, physical attraction, or the wish for recognition. At first glance, everyone thinks these are traps, things to be suppressed, to be overcome. But if we dare to stop and look closely, beneath all these specific desires, there is a common undercurrent: the yearning to be connected, to dissolve into something larger than ourselves. When I was young, I witnessed so many friends torn apart by desires they considered shameful. One was deeply infatuated with fleeting relationships, cursing himself each time they ended. Another was addicted to work, collapsing from exhaustion but unable to stop. Talking with them, I realized what they sought wasn't necessarily fleeting pleasure, but a subtle acknowledgement that they existed, that they mattered to someone, that they belonged somewhere. We often reject desires because they make us feel fragile. When we long for something, we simultaneously reveal the empty space in our hearts, and fearing scorn, fearing disappointment, we label desire as evil. We think suppressing it is the path to maturity. But it is precisely then that we miss the opportunity to realize that every longing is a mirror reflecting the deep source of life. I once meditated and felt an unnameable thirst arise within me. It wasn't for food, nor for sex, nor for any specific goal. It was like a distant song echoing, inviting me to return. At first, I felt uneasy because my mind wanted to attach it to a clear object. But as I allowed it to be present, I realized it was the call of connection, the longing to unite with the whole. And surprisingly, that thirst was no longer a burden, but became a warm current guiding me back to life. Looking back, I see a paradox. The very desires that cause us suffering are also the gateway to freedom. If we blindly chase them, we become bound. But if we dare to face them, listen deeply, and trace them to their core, we find our greatest longing is not to possess, but to belong. Remember a time you truly loved someone. On the surface, it might have been a desire for physical intimacy, but deeper down was the wish to merge, to be seen and fully recognized. Or when you were passionate about an idea, a project, not just for the reward, but because in it you felt alive, connected to something vast. That is the essence of desire, an invitation to return to wholeness. This doesn't mean indulging every desire. If we act impulsively, desire easily turns into a chain of addictions. But if we avoid and deny it, we are also haunted by it. The path lies elsewhere, allowing desire to appear, observing it, then asking, beneath this surface, what am I truly seeking? A man once shared with me that for years he sought intimacy in fleeting relationships. He called himself a sex addict, but in a moment of reflection, he broke down crying. All I ever wanted was to be held tightly and to know I was important to someone. It was when he dared to look directly at his longing that he discovered the fundamental need that had been hidden for so long. And from that point, the endless cycle of searching began to unravel. Desire is a harsh but honest teacher. It points to where we feel incomplete. But if we are brave enough to listen, it also shows us what is essential. Life wants to be connected, the heart wants to be loved, the soul wants to return. The paradox lies here. The path to liberation is not to flee desire, but to step into its midst, to listen to it completely, not to satisfy every hunger, but to recognize the call beneath. Then, desire is no longer a chain, but a compass. If desire shows us where we long to connect, then fear exposes where we feel most vulnerable. Fear is like a cold wind that makes us shrink back, putting up barriers. Sometimes we try to deny it, giving it other names: anger, indifference, control. But if we look directly, we know the root is still fear of loss, fear of being hurt, fear of not being strong enough to face the truth. I remember sitting with a young woman suffering from a terminal illness. Her eyes were fixed on the ground, her hands clasped together. She said she was afraid of dying, but even more afraid of the emptiness before death. Afraid no one would remember her, afraid her life would be meaningless. If I had only tried to reassure her, all my words would have been empty. I invited her simply to place her hand on her heart and whisper, "I am afraid." Within seconds, tears welled up. And strangely, her face softened, not because the fear disappeared, but because for the first time, she allowed it to be present and named. Fear often makes us think that closing off our heart is the safe way, but in reality, it is what makes us suffocate. The more we close off, the more isolated we become. Only when we dare to open, even trembling, do we feel truly alive. There is a paradoxical truth. Precisely when we allow fear to be present, it loses its power. I myself once experienced intense anxiety. At times it was so strong I thought I would faint. My body tensed, my mind raced with catastrophic scenarios. By habit, I wanted to resist, to push it away. But in a rare moment of clarity, I remembered what I always taught others: stop, breathe, and say, "Welcome." Doing so, I realized I wasn't completely overwhelmed. There was a part of me still vast enough to embrace the storm. From then on, instead of fighting it, I walked with it. Some ask, will opening your heart to fear make you weak? But in fact, only those who dare to look directly are truly courageous. Weakness is when we are controlled by fear without even knowing it. Strength is when we dare to let it be present, even to let it soften us. In meditation courses, I often invite students to try sitting with a small fear, like fear of rejection or fear of failure. As they close their eyes and pay attention to their breath, many feel their hearts racing, their palms sweating. But when they place a hand on their chest and quietly say, "It's okay, I am here with this fear," their faces relax. They discover they are not the fear, they are the one holding it. Fear, like desire, is not an enemy, it is a part of life. Fear itself shows that we know how to love, to cherish, to long. We fear loss because we have loved. We fear failure because we have hoped. If we only see fear as darkness, we will forever try to chase it away. But if we recognize the seed of love within it, we will know how to open our hearts. A man once confessed that he often got angry at his son for no reason. But when he sat down, he saw that his anger actually masked a fear. Fear that his son would repeat his failures, fear that he couldn't protect his son. When he saw that, he burst into tears. And from that day on, instead of yelling, he began to learn to say, "I'm so worried about you." Closeness was restored, not because he eliminated his fear, but because he dared to acknowledge it. Opening our heart in fear does not make life free of danger, but it makes the experience authentic. We no longer hide, no longer live half-heartedly. And from here, a new possibility opens, learning to love ourselves like a trembling child who needs a hug. There's a moment I can't forget. A student sat before me, her body hunched, her eyes lost. She recounted that whenever she made a small mistake, a voice in her head would immediately declare, "You are useless." I told her to try placing her hand on her heart and whispering, "I am hurting and I am here with this pain." In just a few seconds, her shoulders dropped, her face softened. That was the first time she felt the difference between self-reproach and self-embrace. We often wait for others to provide that embrace. But life doesn't always give us exactly what we need. If we only rely on external sources, we will forever be adrift. There is another possibility. We ourselves can become our own shoulder, the comforter we have always sought. It seems paradoxical, but the truth is we can simultaneously play the role of the one who embraces and the one who is embraced. When we acknowledge our fear, our sadness, we allow the fragile part of us to be revealed. And in that very moment, another part of us, larger and more compassionate, reaches out to embrace. These two parts are not opposed but complementary. That is how compassion blossoms, from the very fragility we once denied. Some say, "I don't know how to love myself, I only hate myself." I often ask in return, when a friend is suffering, what do you do? They answer, "I comfort them, I listen, and I tell them it's okay." I then suggest, try doing that for yourself. The first steps are always clumsy, but just trying plants the seed. I once went through a period of depression. Waking up, I felt a stone pressing on my chest. I hated that feeling, forced myself to get up, stayed busy to forget. But the more I denied it, the heavier the stone became. One morning, I gave in, placed my hand on my chest, and whispered, "I know you're here, my sadness." Tears flowed, but strangely, the stone felt lighter. I realized it was the resistance that made it so oppressive. But when I embraced it, it became a part of me, and I was no longer alone. Compassion for oneself is not indulgence, nor is it an excuse for mistakes. It is looking directly at the truth. We are fragile, we are vulnerable. And precisely because of this, we need tenderness, not a whip. Only when our heart softens towards ourselves can it expand towards others. Imagine a child lost from its mother in a crowd. It cries out, eyes wide with panic. Then a woman approaches, kneels down, and hugs it. Immediately, the panic subsides because there is a sense of safety. Within us, there is also such a child, lost in a crowd of thoughts and judgments. Every time we place a hand on our heart, breathe slowly, and say a gentle word, we become that woman embracing the child within. Transformation happens at a very subtle level. A person who is addicted to self-judgment every day just tried a few times to tell themselves, I am just human. After a few months, his face was less tense, his relationships lighter. There are no instant miracles, only patient repetition until compassion becomes a new habit. I believe that within each person there is an infinite source of compassion just waiting to be opened. When we experience embracing ourselves, we realize this embrace has never been lacking. We just forgot how to reach out. One day, during a retreat, I invited everyone to imagine a circle around their heart. Initially, the circle was only big enough to contain themselves. Then I told them to expand it to include loved ones, friends, then even strangers they had briefly encountered, then even those who made them angry or even hurt them. And finally, the circle expanded to encompass all beings. When the exercise ended, the room was silent, many faces wet with tears. Not because they had resolved all conflicts, but because for the first time, they felt the vastness within their own hearts. Love often starts from personal need. I want to be comforted, I want to be loved. But when the heart has learned to embrace itself, it doesn't stop there. Like ripples spreading when a stone is thrown into water, compassion naturally expands without command. I remember visiting a dying patient. He held my hand and whispered, my whole life I only thought about work, about money. Now I wish I had spent more time loving. Those words were like a mirror reflecting the truth. At the end of the journey, what we regret is not having loved too much, but having loved too little. Expanding the circle of compassion doesn't mean embracing the whole world in a day. It starts with small steps, listening to a suffering friend, smiling at a stranger, forgiving someone who hurt us. Each small action is a spark, and together they create a sky. Some ask me, how can one love even the cruel? I don't say we must condone bad actions, but I believe that even in the cruel, there is a child who was once hurt, who once longed for love and didn't receive it. When we see that part, we no longer see just an enemy, but a lost human being. This understanding doesn't erase responsibility, but it opens the possibility of acting without being led by hatred. This is the Bodhisattva spirit, not waiting to be perfect before helping others, not waiting for the world to be safe before opening one's heart. Even in fragility, we can still give. A bodhisattva is not a superhero, but anyone who dares to extend their heart beyond themselves. I once witnessed a miraculous moment in a poor community. A 10-year-old boy gave his meager portion of rice to his neighbor's younger sibling because he saw the child was hungrier. That gesture was simple, but it contained the entire bodhisattva spirit, placing the happiness of others on par with, even above, one's own. Expanding compassion is also a way to heal social fractures. When we see the suffering of others as our own, we cannot remain indifferent. From there, small actions protecting the environment, helping the vulnerable, speaking kind words are no longer obligations but natural expressions. A Zen master once said, when a bird flies, it doesn't ask, should I spread my wings? It just spreads them because that is its nature. Compassion is the same. When we reconnect with our pristine nature, love is no longer a command but a natural breath. There are moments in life when we look back and see ourselves filled with mistakes. Words that hurt loved ones, wrong decisions, times we turned away when we should have stepped forward. In these memories, many feel such shame that they want to erase the past. But the more we try to deny the darkness, the tighter it clings. Only when we touch another truth that, beneath it all, we still carry a fundamental inner brightness does that cycle loosen. I call this truth primordial goodness, not a kind of morality bestowed by society, nor something to be achieved through effort. It is like the vast sky, which can be obscured by clouds but never disappears. Even if we make mistakes, that sky is still there, waiting for the clouds to part. A woman once told me she couldn't forgive herself for abandoning her child during her addiction. Years after sobering up, she still lived in remorse. During a practice session, I invited her to visualize the child she once was and whisper, "Though mother made mistakes, her essence still had the capacity to love." She burst into tears, not because the mistakes vanished, but because for the first time she felt something within her was still pure, never corrupted. From that place, the possibility of forgiveness began to open. Forgiveness is often misunderstood as overlooking or condoning wrongdoing. In fact, forgiveness is seeing the inherent goodness in oneself and others, even when actions have been misguided. It doesn't erase responsibility, but it allows the heart to stop carrying the burden of hatred. I remember a man who lost his child in an act of violence, so heartbroken that he once vowed to hate the perpetrator for life. But after years of meditation practice, he shared, "If I kept holding onto hatred, I too would slowly die. I want to preserve my love for my child, not hatred for the one who killed them." He didn't deny the loss, but by recognizing primordial goodness, he found the door to forgiveness. Compassion and forgiveness are intertwined. If we don't see the inherent brightness, we will forever view ourselves and others through the lens of mistakes. But when we believe that beneath the dust, the gem still remains, we can gently wipe it clean without hating the stone. There are times when forgiving ourselves is the hardest. We are accustomed to self-judgment, seeing ourselves as culprits, but if we cannot forgive ourselves, we will find it difficult to open our hearts to anyone else. Forgiving ourselves does not mean excusing our actions, but acknowledging, "I made mistakes, and I still carry within me an essence that wants to love, to be good." It is from that place that true change begins. The heart truly opens only when it knows that goodness is not something that needs to be proven. When we realize we are inherently bright, all efforts no longer stem from inadequacy, but from the natural desire to live fully. That is the turning point. From struggling to be worthy, we begin to live as someone who is already enough. We often think that love means finding someone to fill the emptiness within us. But in reality, if we cannot sit peacefully with our own fragility, we will bring it into relationships as a burden. We demand that the other person compensate, that they validate our worth, and then when they don't respond, we feel even more worthless. Radical acceptance changes the starting point. When we know how to stop, look directly at our desires and fears, we no longer impose them on others. We can enter a relationship not to be saved, but to share. Love then is no longer a negotiation, but a shared presence in both joy and fragility. I once met a couple who constantly argued over trivial things, forgetting things, being late, not calling. On the surface, these were petty conflicts. But when they sat together in a listening practice session, what emerged was the core issue. The wife admitted, "Every time you forget, I feel unimportant." The husband broke down crying, "Actually, I'm afraid I'm not good enough, so you'll leave me." Only when they dared to voice their fragility did the wall dissolve. From then on, they began to learn to listen, not to refute, but to understand. There is immense power in mindful listening. When we give our full attention to words, to eyes, to silences, we send the other person a message. "I see you." And often, being seen is what the other person longs for most. However, listening doesn't only happen in big conversations, it's also present in every small gesture. A patient gaze when a loved one is struggling, a gentle touch when they are sad, a non-judgmental silence when they misspeak. All are ways to practice radical acceptance in daily life. Some ask, but what if the relationship has too much hurt? I believe that love doesn't always preserve a relationship intact. Sometimes radical acceptance means accepting the truth that we and the other person cannot walk together. But even then, we can let go without resentment because we understand that each person is simply walking their own path. Practicing radical acceptance in love also means learning to see beauty even amidst imperfection. The other person will have moments of selfishness, weakness, mistakes, just as we do. Instead of seeing it as proof that they are unworthy, we can see it as an opportunity to grow together. Mature love is not a love that eliminates suffering, but a love vast enough to embrace suffering within it. I once saw an elderly couple sitting together in a hospital. The old woman's hands trembled as she fed porridge to the old man, and the old man, though weak, still smiled, his eyes bright. In that moment, there was no right or wrong, no one compensating for the other, only complete presence. Two fragile human beings embracing each other in the last breaths of life. When we stop trying to make others the solution to our own internal lack, we truly become free to love. And love, then, is not something we hold on to, but a space where both can be themselves, without pretense, without hiding. There's a limit that we long believed to be real, the concept of the self. We believe we are our stories, our memories, our fears and desires. We build walls around ourselves. I am this way, I am not that way. But when we begin to delve into radical acceptance, we realize that the things we cling to all change, all dissolve. And in that moment of seeing through it all, we find a vast, silent, luminous space remaining. That is our true nature. I once sat by a spring river, listening to the ceaseless flow of water. Suddenly, the thought came, I am just a small wave in an endless current. When I stopped clinging to my image of myself, stopped analyzing whether I was good or bad, I felt myself dissolve into that river, no longer I, observing, but simply life knowing itself. The relief was indescribable, no one to prove anything to, nothing to hide, only freedom. This realization is not some distant mystical thing. It can come in very ordinary moments. When we sit quietly listening to birds sing, when we laugh with friends, when we see anger flare up and then dissipate. Anytime we clearly see the changing nature of all phenomena, we can touch the unchanging ground behind it, the awareness that encompasses everything. And from that awareness, a new tenderness spreads. If I am no longer confined within a narrow self, then your pain is also my pain. Your joy is also my joy. Compassion, then, is no longer an effort but a natural reflex. Just as the ocean doesn't choose which wave to embrace, it embraces all. However, to embody this realization, we need specific practices because the mind easily forgets, easily returns to old patterns. That is why I dedicate the final section to sharing exercises that can be integrated into daily life. Begin by identifying the delusion of unworthiness. Whenever the judgmental voice arises, stop and name it. Ah, this is the old voice. Simply recognizing it is enough to avoid being swept away. Next, practice Vipassana, observing the body and mind, sensations with calm attention, not trying to fix, just observing like someone sitting by the river, watching the water flow. The sacred pause is also a powerful tool. Just a few present breaths break the reactive habit. From that pause, we have the power to choose a different way of acting. Sometimes, a simple practice is whispering, yes, to this moment. Yes to fear, to pain, to joy. The word yes is not surrender, but an acceptance that allows the heart to open. Don't forget to return to the body. Place a hand on your belly as you breathe, feel the earth supporting your feet. The body is the gateway to return. When pain arises, instead of resisting, try whispering, it's okay. This acceptance transforms pain into a teacher, teaching us about fragility and patience. Desire is the same. Instead of rushing to fill it, sit with it and ask, what am I truly longing for? Often, the answer is not an external object but a deep need for connection. With fear, try greeting it like a guest, inviting it to sit down for tea, and realizing that while it is here, you are still vaster than it. Practice Tonglen, breathing in your own and others' pain, breathing out love. This exercise awakens compassion, breaks down the feeling of separation. Nurture a forgiving heart by recalling moments when someone forgave you or when you forgave someone else. Feel the relief and allow it to spread. Unconditional love can begin with a simple wish. May you be well. Try sending this wish to yourself, your loved ones, and even those who are difficult. Mindful communication is an equally important practice. Each time you speak, be aware of what seeds your words carry, connection or division. And finally, the simple question, who am I? Not to find an intellectual answer, but to remind us to return to the vastness that already is. Acceptance, after all, is not a philosophy to read and set aside. It is a way of living each moment. Living as if you are already enough, as if this world is already enough. In every breath, every glance, every touch, you can practice it to remind yourself that your nature is freedom, clarity, and overflowing love. The ultimate destination of this journey is not a formula to end suffering, nor a promise that your life from here on will be peaceful. What I want to convey is simply this. You don't need to become someone else to be allowed to live, to be allowed to love, to be allowed to be peaceful. Right now, with all your cracks and imperfections, you are enough. Ask yourself, for how many years have you lived with the feeling that you had to prove something? How many times have you told yourself, only when I am more successful, thinner, smarter, more recognized will I be worthy? If you look back, do you realize how much energy that period of life consumed just to fight the shadow of not enough that you yourself created? The paradox is, the more we strive for perfection, the further we move away from life. The fears and desires we try to hide are precisely the gateways to touch the truth. The truth that within every human being, there is a gentle stream that has never dried up. We just need to stop resisting, and it will flow forth. The question I want to leave you with is, if tomorrow you woke up and stopped believing you were not enough, how would you live differently? What would you say to yourself, to those you love? What would you dare to try that you've avoided for so long out of fear? The biggest lesson I learned while writing these pages is that radical acceptance doesn't make pain disappear, but it transforms how we live with pain. It doesn't turn the world into a paradise, but it gives us new eyes to see that even in suffering there is tenderness, even in fragility there is strength, even in cracks there is light. And if you have ever denied yourself, please try just once to place your hand on your chest and whisper to yourself, "I am here and I accept myself." That whisper may seem small, but it can be the seed for an entire garden. I know it's easy to say, difficult to practice. You will forget, you will stumble, there will be days when you find yourself back in the old cage. But it's okay. Radical acceptance doesn't demand that you remember it constantly. It doesn't require you to be perfect in your acceptance. It simply invites you, whenever you realize you've lost your way, to return to a breath, a touch, a moment of tenderness. And that alone is enough. Before I conclude, I want to invite you to hold a question in your heart. How would you live if you believed that your deepest nature is good, is pure, is whole? Let that question accompany you, not to find an immediate answer, but to open up new ways of living, new relationships, and perhaps an entirely different perspective on life itself. Thank you for walking with me to the end of this path. The journey is not over, because life will continue to test you, and your heart will have to learn to open many more times. But I believe that once you have tasted the freedom of complete acceptance, you will never forget its flavor. I look forward to meeting you in the next book.